Hey, if you'd like to earn CEUs for this webinar, join the Safeopedia community at the link in the description below. Now, on to the show.
My name is Scott Cuthbert. I'm a co-founder of Safeopedia and excited to present today's webinar and introduce our special guest. We have Corey Pitzer, CEO of SafeMap International, and Ewan Alexander from SafeMap International as well. And today we're going to be talking about, is safety killing your business? So interesting topic, and I'm sure everybody's interested to find out the answer. So let's start with that question, Corey. Why would safety as we know it be killing the business?
Scott, I think there's a couple of reasons why I think that's happening. And organizations can have them more or less of this in their organizations. But I think there's four reasons. The first one is I think there is still a lot of separation of focus of safety in the organization. Safety is still operating in a silo in the organization. Even though we say safety is a line management function, I am not convinced that that's actually getting transferred to the line management. Line management buys into it and is very committed to it. But if it's a line management function, safety has to happen in the operational side of the business, inside the operations upstream. And I don't think that's happening. And that's the first one. The other thing is I think that we're still operating from, if I could almost put it, from low point to low point in a business. If there's an accident, there's a lot of focus on safety, and then things go well. There's an absence of accidents, and then things are more relaxed. In terms of safety, it becomes part of the normal activities of the safety department, and it's a bit of an erratic focus. The other thing is, as a result of that, I think it still remains a downstream business, a downstream activity. We have not really integrated threat analysis upstream in the planning processes in the organization systemically. It still focuses on what happens at the front end. Doesn't matter which view we're following, we are following still. If an accident happens, the focus is at what happened at the operational level, not at the tactical or strategic level. But I think the most important one is I think there is still and more evolution of cults in safety, where there is this blind compliance to rules and regulations. It's almost as if there's a stranglehold of safety on flexibility and agility and innovation in the organization. We hear a lot about work as planned, work as intended, or work as done, and I think there's a huge amount of strangling of flexibility and innovation of the front end of the business at the very least. So for me, there is this downside that comes from that, and that's why I say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had a lot of conversations over the years, and you have two companies in your profile, SafeMap and RiskMap. We talk a lot about safety. We talk a lot about risk. So when did you decide to split those two, and why?
It was quite a few years ago, actually, already, probably 2015, even if I remember well, 2015, 2014, we had this discussion that that SafeMap is very much a focus on the new view of safety. SafeMap has always been there. I started with the new view of safety probably in the late 80s in my first role. And when I started SafeMap, that was the focus on safety differently, safety in terms of safety too. But increasingly it became clear to me that there is a strong foundation in safety, which is traditional risk management. And it's almost as if the two concepts were starting to become incompatible, conflicting. And I realized then that in order to keep both avenues alive in an organization, I need to also split my consulting process and approach to SafeMap as focusing on the new view, progressive, almost against the safety one idea, which is what the risk map is about. But the risk map is not traditional, and I'll let Ewan talk about that, but is to keep the foundational side, the focus on risk, effective in our business as well, because it has to live together in any business. Almost that safety one and safety two has to live and continue to live together in a business to be truly effective. And that's the reason why we split it. And Ewan is taking charge of that risk map side of the business.
Right. So, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but SafeMap fits with new view and HOP concepts.
Yeah, it has always been the foundation of SafeMap in that we always had a focus on human and organizational performance. I remember my very first intervention as SafeMap was based on what I'd done in my first role in South Africa, where we actually introduced at 62 mines in the company, we introduced a HOP process at each of those mines. We did safety culture analysis. We had learning teams in the organization prepared for each of those sites. And it had a huge impact on the company. Was Gencor in South Africa, which is today BHP. And we introduced all the principles of HOP already at that stage. And that's what basically flowed into SafeMap ever since. And I've always focused on that side of the safety equation, if you could put it like that, from the SafeMap perspective.
Right. So you mentioned Ewan is heading up the Risk Map initiative. So how does Risk Map align with the HRO concept?
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott and Corey. First of all, like in my view coming into this role with SafeMap, is I really saw the integration as pretty strong. And the basic model that I had in mind was that leadership supported by systems creates your culture, and it's your culture that creates your performance. So we've designed RiskMap from the beginning to focus on the risk systems, but do it in a way that strongly enhances a resilient culture and therefore creates the performance that we're looking for, particularly in terms of improving risk to reduce or eliminate the risk of fatalities. So first of all, to answer your question, Scott, about how does RiskMap align with HRO, just a little bit about RiskMap. It's our view is that it's a systematic view of risk that we need to take. It focuses on 4 principles. And the 4 principles are: every system must be systemically challenged or it atrophies. So in safety one, we've seen many risk systems that are out in place, but they need to be challenged, and they need to be challenged effectively. And that's very different than auditing or verifying, this challenging process, which we'll talk about a little bit more. The second, which completely aligns with SafeMap, is that people are your biggest strength. We're not trying to design or engineer around our people. We're trying to use our people effectively to make them the strongest link in the risk management chain. The third is the notion of randomness, which we'll talk about. And the fourth is to effectively use your front line. And that's, you'll hear me talk about Safe Sentry in a few minutes. Those are all designed around making your risk system effective. In terms of how it aligns with HRO principles, there's 4 high reliability organization principles. The first is a preoccupation with failure. The second is reluctance to simplify. Third is sensitivity to operations. Third is deference to expertise. And the fifth is commitment to resilience. And we have designed the RiskMap system to fully adopt these principles in our implementation. And many of our customers see that, and they see how practical and effective the process is. And that's the feedback that we get. This is a hugely practical intervention that makes significant improvement to our risk system.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ewan. And back to Corey, like, what are those 5 missing links in safety?
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time in my career on the way that safety is actually structured in a business and the way that safety is actually happening. We hear often that safety is an emergent property in a business. It is what happens in the organization. And I've always wondered, are we missing things in safety? And there's a couple of things that are actually, I think, we're missing. The very first one is human ingenuity, human capability. There's still a lot of focus in safety on what people do wrong, the human failure side of things. And whether we in safety 1 or safety 2 or HOP, we still focus on what people are doing wrong. We want to learn from what goes wrong in the organization. And then there's this idea we should learn from what goes right in the organization. But there's no real tools and techniques in that field. But we're always focusing on the shortfalls, especially when an accident happens. And Ewan mentioned that, the humans are the strongest link in the safety chain. That has been our fundamental tenet for a long time. But I wonder how much we actually reinforce that in an organization. That's the first one. The second one is metrics. All the metrics that we deal with are visible metrics, are the things that we can measure, that's available to be measured. And also want to talk a little bit later about latent metrics, the metrics, the data that we don't see. How do we measure when nothing happens? And what do we measure when nothing goes wrong in the organization? And there's a range of metrics there that I think we're missing. The third one is, I think the best term I have for that is the split second. So many things happen in that split second. So many things go wrong in a split second. Well, the rest of the time, it is actually safe. There's systems are in place. The integrity of the system are beyond question. But then there's the split second moment of collapse. And everything goes wrong in that split second. And then everything looks wrong as when you look back at this and you say, well, this is an accident waiting to happen. And we forget that it actually went well. It was safe and contained and controlled and effective for most of the time. And it's that split second that then goes wrong, that colors and defaces everything around it. So the split second is a missing link, I think, what happens in that. The other one is risk migration. Risk migration is something that you and I have been talking a lot about, that there's a lot of focus on changes in the organization when an accident happens. There's rule changes, there's procedure changes, and it creates new risk. And I've seen this so many times, how we actually install a fix for something, and that fix is actually creating much more dangerous risk that you won't see for a long time. You may never see it, but sometime down the road, a catastrophic event can be a result of it, and it's been something that was created with all good intent in the past. And this is another area. I think this is a big area of focus that we don't see that often. And then randomness, the whole issue of randomness. There's chaotic changes in organizations happening in terms of, if you think about risk likelihood, exposure, control failures, variation in impact. One day the result of a failure can be a small injury. On another day, that very same failure can be a fatal event. And there's a lot of randomness. It's almost like there's a big soup of randomness in an organization. And I don't know if we fully understand that in our management of risk, or we fully cater for that. I think we don't. And those are for me, the 5 missing links that I like to think more about in how do we address that in safety in the organizations.
Right. That's interesting. Lots to dive into for sure. So Ewan, what is Delta, and where did the idea come from?
So anybody that's worked with Corey for any length of time knows that he's very creative, he's very innovative, and also very good with acronyms. And so the concept of delta is, it fits beautifully for what we're trying to do in the risk side of things. Delta stands for deep elimination of latent triggers of accidents. And I'll take that apart in a second. First of all, to answer your question directly, where did the idea come from? It actually came from Netflix. Netflix has been tremendously successful as a company. And their success is the fact that they deliver movies, shows, streaming all over the world seamlessly. If you were watching a movie and you kept getting the circle showing up, you know, it was timing out, it wasn't streaming, Netflix would be done. And so they recognized that in order to be successful, they needed to make sure their systemic flaws were found and resolved before that fatal incident occurred in their terms, where the show quits or has to stream. So they learned how to hack their own system. And to do this, they hired hackers. And their job was to challenge the system, Scott, and find the errors before an incident occurred. And we thought that was absolutely beautiful and perfectly applied to our safety world and to our risk world. So many times when we've gone out, we see the risk systems in place, and they're huge. They take up a tremendous amount of time, and they go out to look for controls, etc. And because of various expectations, the reports all come back as everything's green, everything's perfect, when in fact it's not. And the system that's not challenged effectively will lead itself to atrophy. It will lead itself to indicating there's no issues when they are. So we come up with the idea of delta, deep elimination of latent triggers of accidents. Here's how it applies. First thing, let me talk about latent triggers. So the way I talk about this with our clients is that the trigger of the next fatality or a serious incident that could come into your organization is already in the organization. It's here. It's not going to fly in from somewhere else. It's not going to be imported. It's in the process and the systems. It's in the way work is actually done. And our challenge as safety professionals is to find those triggers before the incident occurs. We use the word latent, so latent triggers, because they're lying, as Corey said, deep in the organization. They're just lying there. They're waiting for the wrong set of random circumstances all to come together at the same time. And then, boom, you've had a huge incident, fatality, worse, multiple fatalities, or a catastrophic event. But they're there all the time and everything is perfect. Just 99.9% of the time, nothing happens. So we think everything is good. So we're looking for the latent triggers and we're looking for them systemically. The word deep is there because they're deep in the organization. If they were easy to find, we would have solved them already. There might have been an incident and we investigated it and we solved it. But we focus the organizations to dig deep into the processes, the systems, and proactively find these. We didn't call it EELTA, like ILTA or something, because that would be easy. They're deep, is the concept. And elimination is obviously the most important word. Once we found them, we need to eliminate them, that potential systemically. We need to find out where our weakness is systemically, what's weak in our process, what's weak in the way we think work's being done versus the way it actually is being done, and resolve that proactively. So it's a beautiful system that's worked incredibly effectively where we deployed it to find these latent triggers in advance. It has to focus on what's high consequence and low probability. If you try to do this with slips, trips, and falls, or hand injuries, it doesn't work. You overwhelm the organization. But you need to focus on the so-called black swans, the things that are unlikely to occur. But if it does happen, it can ruin your business and the lives of many people.
Right. And so, Corey, I think most people, myself included, understand the concept of a black swan event. But you mentioned strange animals that I'm not familiar with, like blue ducks and purple dragons and white slugs. Why those, and what are they?
The Black Swan concept is very well known. Nassim Taleb developed this for catastrophic failures in the financial world, and it's been gradually deployed and applied to catastrophic failures in our world of industrial accidents. And the key feature of a Black Swan, according to Nassim Taleb, was it cannot be predicted. It can only be predicted in hindsight. You can actually explain it after it happened. And most of these events are like that. But there was another financier, Didier Sonnet, who said, well, if you dig deep into digging deep into the organizations that had these events, there were enough indicators of these events possible. And therefore, he said that there's an element of predictability on some of those Black Swan events that he looked at. And he created the concept of Dragon King, which not as fancy as I thought, as Purple Dragon could be. So I changed it to Purple Dragons. And then this is very much related to a very big exercise that I was involved in for a large mining company around a global intervention. This is a large organization with 40 plus sites around the world, 100,000 people working in the organization, and contracted me to support them with a process called elimination of fatalities. And it was an absolute incredible experience for me to go onto these sites and to look for, with teams, employees that we brought into the process, talking to frontline people, and starting to look for Black Swans and starting to look for fatalities that are sitting there underneath the radar. And we have found literally thousands of possible events, and I call these far misses, not near misses. And so the definition of a Purple Dragon is it's a Black Swan event, but it is discoverable. If you actually have the process in place in the organization and you can discover the possibility, that is not a Black Swan, that is a Purple Dragon. And then added to that was this catastrophically, but there's single events, single fatal events. And that's what I refer to as blue ducks. That's they come out of the blue, they're sitting under the radar, and I can give you so many examples of what people told me they're doing that would never feature on any database ever. And it would never be visible in any shape or form. And that's a blue duck. And a white slug is there's a strange event in organizations that you'll only hear about that event and understand that event after it's happened. You'll never see it. It may never happen in your organization. And I've seen some examples of this where if it wasn't for a coincidental observation, and one of the examples is that a person saw a scuff mark on a pipe and wondered what that was, and discovered that that scuff mark is created by somebody who stands on it and leans over the edge of the side of a ship, and in order to clean cameras, and if his hands would slip, it would end up in the sea. Now, that would never be discovered until somebody dies. And then they may not even find out how the person died. That's this deep, almost impossible things. That's what I call white slug in organizations. And it is out there in terms of what is possible, plausible, imaginable, what's almost impossible to happen, way beyond the risk knowledge that we have that's based on what already happened. This is digging deep into the organization systems and the operations and possibilities to identify these kind of almost esoteric kind of possibilities. And that's why I use these terms to make it a bit more palatable. And all organizations are subject to this kind of drift in the systems, in the integrity, in their controls and protections, which I remember James Reason wrote quite a lot about as entropy. All systems are naturally inclining to failure, to drift into failure. And we have to have deep systems in the organization to understand what they are. We have to measure there, but we also have to have the ability to make those discoveries of things that may exist in that split second that I mentioned earlier, and you may never see it again if it wasn't for that split second, and we need to uncover those. And that's why I think we need techniques and technology, processes to actually find those possibilities in organization, more so because we've got a hugely controlled environment. We've got incredible capabilities these days to protect and to create controls. So what we don't see is probably becoming a bigger and bigger issue, I think, in safety into the future.
Right.
That's where I got those terms from.
Yeah, great. And I mean, you touched on it a little bit, and I loved you an example of Netflix, and obviously not directly safety related, but I think everybody can understand that concept. And I can say from personal experience, like if I'm in the basement and I'm on Wi-Fi, like Netflix is the only option. If you try YouTube or any of the other ones, you know, you're going to get that buffering and those issues, right? So how do you stay proactive and continue to find those problems before they occur? And maybe we can get into the Delta structure versus the Delta network, and how you measure success and the impact of the effort.
Sure. So the Delta structure is, going back to Netflix, that's your basic delivery processes. So in our terms, in terms of risk and safety, it's your safety system. And it's your risk system that you've deployed. You know, so a typical risk system, you have identified your priority unwanted events, you've identified your controls, you've selected critical controls through a risk analysis, and you develop verification criteria, and people go out and verify, and you start to get feedback on how well your processes are running. And that should start to find some of these latent triggers in and of itself. And so typically, you know, companies have been running this system for more than 20 years now, and a long time, and have a lot of experience. And as I was deploying the system, then back in my background, when we first started off, we were at 60% verification compliance, and it quickly went above 85, then into 90, 95. And I was happy with 85% compliance. I was really happy, because that meant we were finding things, and we were finding things proactively, and we're having the opportunity to fix them. But what happens over time, as I said earlier, is I love the way Corey just put it, you know, through James' reason, the system has entropy. It starts to deteriorate. And the way I've seen that play out around the world is, first of all, as I said earlier, it's a big load in the organization to do all these verifications. And if the controls aren't well designed and the verification questions aren't well designed, if they're too general, this becomes a tick the box activity. And people go out in the field, they're looking to see what happens, and they go, tick, that's there, tick, that's there, tick, that's there. And they stop thinking about how risk is really being managed in the field, because the controls aren't designed aren't perfect. You know, there's, as we said, there's randomness comes into the organization, and things change. And most of the time people adapt to those changes. So you have tick the box verification. The other thing I noticed was that the verifiers, people going out to verify the controls, started to find what they expected to find. And so again, that became almost, it wasn't quite a tick the box exercise. They were making notes, but they weren't challenging. They were seeing what they expected to see, because they had done it so many times. And the fourth factor we saw was that management expected green. You know, we all want our controls to be effective, and leaders said, these controls must be green. And guess what? That's what they got. And so people stopped challenging. And so I've said to some management in the past that, you know, with the risk system, the way you're applying it, you would be better off doing nothing than what's happening in the application of the system. Because the way it's being done now, you're telling yourself that the risk system is working well when it's not. There are underlying flaws. And that's worse than doing nothing. You're better off not to have a risk system at all than be telling yourself it's effective when it's not. So that became the purpose of the network, which was the challenge process, which was the hackers. It's the people going in to find these latent triggers before there's accidents. And we've had tremendous success doing that. How do we measure that success? You know, success is hard to measure in this space because you never know what doesn't happen. You always know what did happen. It's very hard to know what hasn't happened. And, you know, we've put a lot of thought into that space, and we've started to come up with measures. The key thing that we've done, though, that I feel I'm most proud of is the impact of the organization in terms of having them looking for what hasn't happened, to have, as the industry calls it, the chronic unease, to be looking and finding these situations before an incident happens. Chronic unease is a great concept.
Yeah, and on that note, Corey, can you explain chronic unease, the coefficient of chronic unease for us, so that we can?
If I can refer back to the activity, this project that I had with this mining company on elimination of fatalities, through that activity, we've generated an enormously rich database. You know, we visited 42 sites. We talked to employees at the front end. As we were talking to employees, we also had a set of questions, 18 factors that we used to determine what is the level of maturity, safety maturity in the organization. And we coded their inputs at night after we had discussions with them. We were teams of 12, 15 people working in pairs. So we would have these discussions, we'd come back and code their information. And in that way, we were able to get a distinction between high maturity organizations, medium and low maturity organizations. And we typified that as reactive, rational, and resilient. And then after we've had this whole project finished, myself and two other, one executive from this mining company, and another safety expert that was part of this process with us, Michael Byrne, we sat for a week here in Vancouver, and we started looking at what are the differences between organizations that we engaged with in terms of what differentiate between them. And it was a hard slog, but we came up with 7 key indicators of chronic unease. And since then, we've developed a questionnaire that measures these 7 indicators at 3 levels. So you send out a questionnaire to employees in the organization. You tell them to make a selection between 3 options on each one of those 7 indicators, and then we calculate what is their level of chronic unease, if I can put it in simple terms. And those 7 areas were, first of all, what is the level of risk transparency? And with risk transparency, meaning what was the degree to which employees found issues in the organization, report them, and the extent to which that is allowed to go up the echelons in the organization as a risk transparency in that organization. The other one was width of focus on risk. So many organizations have got defined risk registers, and they have controls and critical controls associated with that. But a lot of the things that we actually discovered was not inside those risk registers. It was actually outside of those definitions. So the more narrow the focus is, the less chronic unease you'll find in the organization, because they only focus on what they've defined as risk based on what has happened in the organization. The other one is mindset of causation. You know, why do we have accidents? And the high mature organizations would have a focus on, well, it's embedded in our systems, failures and flaws in our operational parameters. The low maturity organization would say, well, that's what happens. People make mistakes at the front end, and that would be the one. Others are the integration of risk controls, the extent to which safety procedures and risk procedures are actually part of the process and not added on, not as an extra burden in the organization, but the way they do business. Ratio of upstream risk control is an interesting one, and I probably need a whole different webinar on just on these indicators, but the extent to which they focus on the hierarchy of control in simple terms. And you see that in terms of what you see at the front end, are these risks that we've uncovered, are they overlooked, underestimated, typical things that happen at the front end, or are they tolerated? Are they inherent? Are they part of the risk, the work pressure in the organization? So what drives the occurrence of these in the organization? And that's a very interesting ratio that we've seen. A type of compliance, the extent to which people are willing to challenge management, challenge supervisors about critical controls or rules, or not. Are they just blindly complying? And then coming back to what Ian talked about, the depth of self-challenge. How deep can the organization challenge itself? Do they have actual systems in place? Do they measure those impacts? Or is safety seen as the way we manage it after accidents happened? So those are indicators, very real indicators that we can actually measure about chronic unease in an organization.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about some pretty impactful concepts. Might be new for some people, and obviously you kind of have to go deep within an organization to implement and understand these. And you mentioned, a lot of times people find what they're looking for, it's compliance based and it's a checklist. So I'm sure there's as much untraining as there is as training. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the practical Delta deployments and examples of some of the findings.
Yeah, absolutely. We've deployed this in mining and a bit in construction. We've done it with below ground, underground operations, above ground, and we've done it at sea or underwater. And we've deployed it where there's been no risk systems in place, and we've helped companies put the basic risk system into place, and that's been hugely productive in and of itself. Every team that we've trained finds an opportunity of significance just by going through the training. It's been 100% reliable that we find something significant just in the training. And we've also done it in mature systems as well, where everything is green, and when we challenge the system, we find significant opportunities. So examples, this was in training. It was an example of a purple dragon, where a part of an operation, particularly the mineral separation process, which is where all the value is derived and where the risk of theft becomes extremely high. The status being given to security was superseding the status being given to risk mitigation. And in this case, the risk of a conveyor fire for welding put the whole enterprise at risk. If we had the conveyor fires are notoriously difficult to put out, and the system of controls around control of limiting the start of a fire were really weak because security was being given higher priority. The system challenge found that, and it was immediately corrected by management. So that's an example of a purple dragon found in training, just by the practical deployment. The second one I'd like to talk about is lifting. When I look at lifting, lifting of heavy objects around the world, I generally see weakness in the control of the drop zone. So quite often, when the risk analysis is done, people say that yes, that's a critical control. We have to control the drop zone. And what that means is to get up red tape, everything's red tape, nobody can enter that area while the lift is occurring. What it completely ignores is what's the position of the person while the load particularly is coming into position. And so many times around the world, we see people in the line of fire, in the drop zone, the drop zone is controlled in terms of keeping other people out, but the people doing the work put themselves at risk. And when this idea gets introduced systemically and corrected, everybody will say, yeah, we have taglines. Why I don't understand why taglines aren't being used. But it's this in-depth look at the detail of how work is actually being done that finds these kind of issues. So if I had to pick a systemic area where I see weakness around the world, that is the control that's ticked the box that the area under the load is controlled, but where I see more risk, significant risk being taken by workers, all with good intent. But,
Right.
So another system that I haven't had a chance to talk about, but we've had great success deploying is Safe Sentry, and that involves the frontline worker, which is one of the HRO principles, getting, empowering the front line and getting feedback from the front line and getting their feedback. We've also had tremendous success with that process in seeing risk that's not being seen.
Yeah, great. And on the Safe Sentries note, Corey, I know we've talked about Deming's principles and involving that front line and getting your team engaged. So can you talk a little bit about Safe Sentries and what it is and how it works within an organization?
Yeah, I'm very enthusiastic to talk about that. The Safe Sentry system is, I'm so excited about the system and what it is achieving on a day-to-day basis. It seems, very simple. The system seems very simple, and it is simple because we want to deploy this at the front end of the organization. And so, basically, what happens in very basic terms, it is a role that is played every day in a team by one person in a team, and that role is rotated. And the task of the person, when that person is appointed as the Safe Sentry for the day or for whatever period, is to do risk observations, but engaging with fellow employees in the process, not to go and observe their behaviors and a BBS kind of observation. It is a risk observations. So basically, it is a risk discovery process. They go out, engage with the person. We have an app that we've developed, which is a very basic, beautiful app that allows the person to record the information, take a photo, do a voice recording of what they see, and they take a photo, and then they actually analyze this risk, what they see, with a little risk calculator. They verify the controls that are supposed to be in place there, and they classify that as one of what we call the 6 whys. Is it overlooked, underestimated, rewarded, inherent, pressurized by work tempo, or tolerated? One of those 6 areas. And what it then does, it delivers a range of metrics. But the most important value that comes out of this whole process is the discovery of risks at the front end. And you'd be absolutely astounded. I sit every week with the management teams on a Monday, and we go through the observations of the past week. And I'm always just bowled over by how powerful these observations are, how clever they are, the things that they see that is almost hidden from most observation processes, because they work with it and they actually know where it happens. And as this develops, the risk transparency in the organization, the culture of reporting, the positive, and this is where the HOP principles are being put into place by the system. And at the same time, it is focusing on the HRO principles. So there's a system that really integrates this. And as this happens, they become more and more involved. The observations become more and more smart and clever, and the whole system generates itself into higher levels of maturity. But importantly, it gives the management of the organization a real handle on things that can, this split-second moment thing that I talked about earlier on, that happens in the organization momentarily, and quickly can be closed out, quickly can be looked at why this is occurring in the organization, and then solved in very proactive and flexible ways. So if you look at those 5 principles that Ewan mentioned in terms of the HRO, there is a preoccupation with failure. They do this every single day. They don't rely on what happened in the past. They don't simplify the organization. They use the expertise of people at the front end, the supervisors and the operational people right there, and proactively thinking about the risk in the organization all the time in most practical ways. And that's why I'm so excited by this whole process, and the value that it brings, not only in terms of risk, but also in terms of the culture in the organization, how it evolves and drives a very positive, constructive culture in the organization. That's really a beautiful side effect of the whole process. But yeah, I can keep on talking about the safe sentry system, but it is just a beautiful, beautiful system in place.
Yeah, well, and I reflecting on kind of some of Ewan's comments and thinking about what goes out in the field with the field level risk assessment, it's kind of more about identifying those known hazards that I remember talking to a VP of safety, and he said it's more about what they don't record on the sheet than what they do record on the sheet, again, because they're looking for these hazards and they want people to identify those common standard hazards that they're already aware of. So the safe sentry is obviously different approach, a different lens, but empowering those people who know more than anybody else what's out there on those job sites. So Ewan, can you talk a little bit about how these concepts can be integrated into a company's operational systems?
Absolutely, Scott. I love the fact that the way you asked the question was, how can they be integrated? And that's the key. Well, our deployments have been very practical and relatively easy. Once people get the concepts, they're very enthusiastic about it. It's a case of how do you use the existing organization and how do you create the space and time. None of her deployments, like 0, have had to add people. Every one of the deployments, the Delta system and Safe Sentry have used the existing organization. You do not have to add people. But what you do have to do is to use existing systems where they are effective. You have to align them, don't send people out to do things twice. Send them out to do the same thing, but accomplish both things, improve productivity. The second thing is, which is the hardest, is I believe organizations must eliminate safety systems that aren't working. We have so many legacy systems that the organization is required to do that don't create value. And if they're not creating value, just like any value-adding process, they should be eliminated. And there are many safety systems out there that should be eliminated and just stopped, or the frequency reduced so that they're not a big impact on the organization. That's the simplest way to create space to do these processes, highly productive processes and systems. And the last thing I'll mention to integrate these is to align leadership metrics. If you're still paying leadership by purely on recordable injury rate, then this system isn't going to help you. You've got to align leadership to support the development and implementation of these systems, to find these black swans. Pay leadership based on how many black swans they've identified and reduced the risk of happening. Pay them based on how many rapid risk reductions they've done. Pay them based on how many latent triggers they've put in place. Pay them on how many safe sentries they've deployed and how many have occurred. But align the metrics to support the integration of the system. Eliminate safety systems that aren't working, and it will all go. And the beauty of it is that people are enthusiastic. Like you asked me earlier, what impact have we had with these systems? The biggest single impact that I'm the most proud of is the enthusiasm of the organization, from leadership to management to supervisors to workers, to focus on what could kill people and eliminate it proactively. That's why we get such positive feedback on our courses. So that enthusiasm of the organization to create a resilient culture is the biggest single positive that I am most proud of.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I know Corey shared a lot of the feedback, and it is overwhelmingly positive, and it is interesting. And I think we could have a whole nother hour set aside talking about implementation and training of the organization, or retraining of the organization, and again, identifying safety systems that are not providing value and that may be outdated, that we need to remove, because again, there's that compliance attitude of we just keep doing what we've been doing, right? So but on that note, I know we're getting close to time here. Corey, can you share with us what's next for SafeMap and RiskMap?
I think a very important thing that Ewan mentioned there is this, is to continue to streamline our interventions, so that people in the organization don't see safety as a burden, but that actually enthusiastically embrace what we do and what they do in terms of safety, to a very great measurement for us. But in terms of the future, there is a whole range of opportunities being opened up by advanced technologies in organizations, and the bringing in of automation, advanced software development, and technology around sensoring and things like that. And I think there lies a great opportunity for us to also look at that and ensure that doesn't bring into the organization some impediments and some failures that is, we don't even know about, that may occur. One of the things is that the safer we make the organizations, the more we protect people, the more people feel protected, and the whole issue of risk homeostasis is increasingly evolving. I think there's an area there that this is more cultural than for SafeMap, is to really see how do we interface with on the risk side, and create new opportunities and new interventions. I'm looking forward to more great ideas like the Safe Sentry to be able to be ready for organizations in the future. But in the meantime, we've just finished the development of Safe Sentry, and we're now starting to make it available to clients. And there's a whole era in front of us just to get this system out there, so people can see the real value of how it embraces HRO and HOP principles into one elegant system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably worth noting as well, that you guys are looking at how to make it manageable for smaller, medium-sized organizations. I mean, you talked about some of the mining and marine companies, obviously larger organizations. So want to encourage folks, if you're at a smaller or medium-sized organization, to definitely reach out to Corey and Ewan. And I know they've put a lot of work into making this really accessible and easy to adopt within your organization. And I want to thank you guys so much for jumping on with me today and running through this. Why is safety potentially killing the business? And providing this insights to our audience. I know there's probably a ton of questions, so we can jump over and get to the questions, and we'll also include your contact information so that anybody who's interested can reach out. I encourage you, I know Corey and Ewan are both great to just jump on the phone and ask some questions and kind of validate any concerns that you might have, and help you kind of move yourself and your organization forward. So with that, maybe we'll jump over to the Q&A.